All right. So foolishly, last week I thought we were going to make it much further into the story of 1 Samuel. I thought we were going to almost make it to the end of chapter 30, and instead we barely got into the beginning. So we're at 1 Samuel chapter 30, and we're going to pick it up at verse 9. We just finished. I want to remind us of this because this is going to be absolutely crucial for what's happening right now. So what just happened, David went off to war with the Philistines, remember. He was the bodyguard of one of the kings. The other commanders saw David there and went, hey, we can't have this guy. Isn't this the guy who's renowned for, killing us? And so what better opportunity would it be than when we're fighting that he would turn on us? And so they, of course, send him back, and he returns to Ziklag. And on his way back to Ziklag, his fortress has been absolutely decimated. It's been razed. It's been burned to the ground. It is gone. And not only is that gone, his family's gone, all of their families are gone, all of their livestock, all of their treasure, everything. Everything has been taken. Ziklag is a ruin. It's done. It's over. And the reason I want us to do this, it's one of the things, and I say this to Rebecca all the time, it's one of my favorite things about God, by the way. God never changes. Isn't that true? God doesn't change. God is who he is and will always be. There's a reason why he, when asked, who do I say who sent me? He says, I am who I am, right? He is. That's who he is. He is God. And why is that important? Because one of the things that we're noticing here is that we've seen the same pattern before. And let me revisit with you. And so I want to revisit all this before we get into this because we're going to see how this is going to conclude and why this is important. Let's look back at the story of Exodus. What happened there? Well, let's go even further. Let's go back to the very end of Genesis. Right? Abraham, answering the call of God, went into the promised land. He is there. He has his children. Isaac has his children. Jacob has his children. The family of God is beginning to be created, and we're starting to see more and more Israelites being born, right? It was with Jacob wrestling with God that suddenly we get the name Israel, and now we start to have the Israelites. We start to have this family of God that is being created because of the promise of God. Not only that, but we see famine strike the land. And even though they are in the promise of God, and even though things are going well for them, and even though life is great, then suddenly something evil strikes, and now they are driven away from their homeland. Not only are they driven away from their homeland, they're driven away from their homeland into the service of someone else. And once they're driven into the service of someone else, eventually that place is destroyed and plundered, and the people of God are brought back into the promised land. Now, what happened with David? David was living a very good life, and he was chosen to be the king, and then suddenly life was really good, and then suddenly opposition came against him, so much so that he had to flee. He was removed from the promised land. He could no longer live this way. And then all of a sudden, he ends up into the service. He's under the service, under the authority of a foreign king. He is under their control, their power, so much so that he doesn't have the choice whether or not he wants to fight. He just goes where he is dictated until he is finally liberated. I also want to remind us that what's happening in chapter 30 and what's happening in chapters 31 are happening concurrently. This is happening at the same time. Remember, David is being sent away in chapter 29. He's being sent away from the other Philistine commanders because they're going to march off to battle. Well, during that time, as David is heading south, this is what happens, and we'll cover what happens in the latter half next week. But he gets to Ziklag. He finds that it's been sacked. Why? Because the Amalekites took advantage of this opportunity. And then it says, and we read about this last time, David, despite the despair, despite his grief and all this, he still chose to pursue God and say, God, things are really hard right now, but I'm going to trust you and trust that you're going to guide me and guide me well. And you know what God says? Pursue them. Verse 9, David and the 600 men with him came to Besor Valley, where some stayed behind. 200 of them were too exhausted to cross the valley, but David and the other 400 continued in pursuit. Now, before you feel like these guys are just lazy slobs, remember, they had just finished making the enormous trek from the north end of Philistine all the way back to Ziklag. And not only did they make it all the way down to Ziklag after doing all that travel, but then it says, remember we read about it last week, they were so full of grief that they literally wept and sobbed and were so full of grief that they had no more strength left. They were just exhausted from the grief. And then all of a sudden, David's given the marching order saying, we're going to go get them back. So I just want to point that out before before anyone thinks anything too negative about these guys. I'm amazed that it was only 200 that couldn't go on. But instead, instead 2/3 are able to continue, but only 1/3 stays behind. And we're going to read later, they stayed behind not just to do nothing, but to actually guard what they're leaving behind, right? Because guess what? If you want to travel fast, you got to travel light, which means that you're going to have to leave some stuff behind. And so these 200 men stayed back to protect some stuff, protect their supplies, all that they have left. Remember, Ziklag was sacked. They have nothing else. All they have are what precious few supplies they had remaining. It says, they found an Egyptian in a field and brought him to David, and they gave him water to drink and food to eat. They gave him part of a cake of pressed figs and 2 cakes of raisins. And he ate until he was revived. He ate and was revived, for he had not eaten any food or drunk any water for 3 days and 3 nights. And David asked him, who do you belong to? Where do you come from? He said, I'm an Egyptian, the slave of an Amalekite. My master abandoned me when I became ill 3 days ago. Now, maybe that sounds weird, too, because you're like, hey, weren't the Egyptians, really powerful and really strong? Well, yeah, they were. But if you remember, Israel and Egypt then are different than what Egypt and Israel are today, right, as far as geography goes. And in between their countries, that's where the Amalekites live. And so the Amalekites essentially were just being opportunist. Whenever they had the opportunity, if they could go into Egypt and raid Egypt, that's what they did. And when they did, they would often take slaves. So Egyptians would become slaves, as well as the Israelites, the Philistines, whomever. Right? The Amalekites were essentially just opportunists, looking for any opportunity to raid when they could. And if you have ever had the opportunity to see that stretch of land, you'll probably understand why. It's not exactly known for being the lush, green, beautiful pastures that you can grow food in. It is, in fact, quite a rough patch of wilderness. It's part of the wilderness that is described when we read about them wandering in the wilderness in the in the rest of the Pentateuch, between the end of Exodus through to Deuteronomy. Anyway, so this Egyptian had been taken slave, and he was a slave of the Amalekite, and he was abandoned. And it says, we raided the Negev of the Kerethites, that one, some territory belonging to Judah, and the Negev of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag. David asked him, can you lead me to this raiding party? And he answered, swear to me before God that you will not kill me or hand me over to my master, and I will take you down to them. And based on the very next sentence, we can assume that David must have made that oath. He made that promise, because it says he led David down, and there they were, scattered all over the countryside, eating, drinking, reveling, because of the great amount of plunder that they had taken from the land of Philistines and from Judah. Now, why do you think that this particular behavior was taking place? Think about where they just raided, this area. Now, maybe you're thinking, I don't know any of these places. Okay, so let's just remind ourselves real quick. Right now, the Philistines are way up in the north, and they're attacking from the north end of the Philistine territory in order to go into Israel. They're going in close to Hebron, which at this time is the capital of Israel. And that they're going to make themselves a big push. They want to bring back the glory days of the Philistines that we read about back in the time of Judges. That is what they are going for. And as a result, they have emptied out all of their territory of soldiers. The Amalekites, way down in the south, really far away from that army, have decided to come in. They quickly sack, raid, take whatever they want, and then leave. At this point, they're thinking, no one knows. No one's coming to get us. So they're out there partying, celebrating, having a good time. Because guess what? If they would have realized that they were being pursued, I can guarantee they probably would have had some sentries set up, but they were so sure of themselves. They were so sure of themselves that they allowed themselves to become vulnerable. Right? They weren't counting on God leading David right to them. It says that David fought them from dusk until the evening of the next day. In case you're unfamiliar, dusk is when the sun goes down. They went through the night and through the morning, and then they just kept fighting until evening. David, remember, they're scattered all over the countryside, right? That's how it reads. Why? Because it's not like they just showed up and picked up chests full of jewels and they just went from camp to camp, right? They were moving herds of cattle, sheep, goats. So they were all scattered all the way across. And so David and his 400 men came rushing in, and through the night they would fight and slaughter people, and through the morning they were fighting, and they were just moving through this valley as they were fighting back against these young Amalekites. It says that none of them got away except for 400 young men who rode off on camels, and they had fled. David recovered everything that the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, young or old, boy or girl, plunder or anything else that they had taken. David brought everything back. He took all of the flocks and herds, and his men drove them ahead of the other livestock, saying, "This is David's plunder." Now remember, it can be easy for us to just read this and go, "Oh, look, yeah, and David got all of his stuff back." No. It wasn't just David's stuff. Remember? They did like a whole loop where they went around and sacked and raided and took everything from all the villages. Ziklag just happened to be the latest victim. David didn't just get his stuff. He got all the stuff. Suddenly they were just overflowing with plunder. Right? It's important for us to recognize that David's fortress was not the only place that was sacked. And I think it's interesting to me, of all the places that they attacked, of all the places that they raided, only one that is ever identified as, "and we burned down," was Ziklag. It's almost like God was taking away the last refuge of David for a reason. It's almost like off somewhere else in another part of the world, something is happening, which means that David will soon have a new home that he needs to go to. And David is having Ziklag removed. It says David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow him and who were left behind at the Besor Valley. They came out to meet David and the men with him. And as David and his men approached, he asked them how they were. Now, okay. I personally believe that capitalism has been the single most effective strategy at making people wealthy, bringing people out of poverty, blah, blah, blah. You've heard the thing. But as a result, it's also led to a mentality that I think this felt like it was going right towards me. And we'll see, and I want you guys to read this next verse and just sit with it for a second and think about how this, because this one really got me. But all of the evil men, evil, not misguided, not fooled. They were evil men, and the troublemakers amongst David's followers said, "Because they didn't come out with us, they will not get a share. We will not share with them the plunder that we recovered. However, each man may take his wife and children and go." This one hit me when I read this. Wait a minute. And it did remind me of another story that Jesus went on to later explain even more about. And I think, and it was amazing how God just connected those for me. But man, that one got me. Because I know I've been there. Wait a minute. I worked hard. I did this. I went out and did this thing. Why are they getting rewarded? And you know what God says about that? That's evil. Ooh. That got me right here. That one was hard for me when I was reading this, and I went, oh man. God calls that attitude evil. And it reminded me of the parable about the vineyard owner, right? Who went out into his vineyard and he recognized, oh, look, the harvest is ready. I need to go get some work. I need to get some people out here so we can harvest these grapes. So he rushed out to the local square and he found a man and he said, hey, I need you to come work for me. I'll give you a day's wage. I'll give you a denarius. And he said, absolutely, that's a good deal. And so the guy came out. And then an hour later, he went, oh, man, I need some more people. He went out and got another one. And he kept doing this all day long. An hour later, he would go get another one. An hour later, go get another one. Until an hour before the end of the day, he went out and he got the one last man. He said, hey, will you come out and work for me for the day, and I'll give you a day's wage? And he said, absolutely. So they all worked for that last hour, and then they're all getting paid because hourly workers should get paid at the end of the day. And they're all getting paid, and the first man, he's given the denarius, and he's happy about it. Yes, I earned my wage. Then as the man goes down the line, here's another one. Wait a minute, but he worked an hour less than me. And he goes along, and the next guy gets a denarius. Wait, he worked 2 hours, all the way until the end, where the last guy also got a full day's wage for 1 hour's work. And of course, the guy was very upset. Well, what do you mean? This isn't fair. And then how does Jesus end the parable? It's not up to you. It's up to the vineyard owner to spend how he wants to spend, to be as generous as he wants to be generous, to do with what's his what he will. And I think this is important for us to recognize because of what David says in the very next verse. David replies, no, my brothers, you must not do that with what the Lord has given us. He recognizes it's not the fruit of your labor, men. This was from the Lord from the beginning. He protected us. He delivered them into our hands, the raiding party that came against us. It was God, not you. If you would have done it under your own strength, we all would have died. 400 men escaped. 400 men attacked, and we know many more must have been killed. That means they were severely outnumbered. Why were they successful? Because of God. No other reason. And so I have to confront the evilness in my own heart. God, do I really look at everything that I'm given as a gift from you? Or do I sometimes fool myself into thinking, I did this, I earned this is mine? Because Jesus was also very clear when he told us the only thing that we can earn, the only wage from our actions, was death, right? What was the wage? The wage of sin was death. We cannot earn our salvation. We cannot earn our righteousness. Those are gifts. They're given. The only thing we earn for ourselves is condemnation. So if you want to take what's yours, by all means, you can have it. But me, I look at this and it was such a clear reminder to me to remember who it is that I'm choosing to serve. By the way, I also want to make it clear, this is not a communist idea. This is a theocratic idea. This is not a share and share alike. This is a God will do with what is his, what he wants to do what is his. Because guess what? Did he spread this amongst all of Israel? No, and in fact, we're going to get to there too. But anyway, so this was a gift from God, and it says, who will listen to what you say? The share of a man who stayed with the supplies is to be the same of him who went out into the battle. All will share alike. And David made this a statute, an ordinance for Israel from that day until this. And when David reached Ziklag, he sent some of the plunder to the elders of Judah, who were his friends, saying, here's a gift for you from the plunder of the Lord's enemies. And David also sent it to those who were in Bethel, Ramoth Negev, Jatir, to those in Aror, Sifmoth, Estemoa, Rakal, and to those in the towns of the Jermelites and the Kenites, to those in Hormah, Borshashan, Atak, and Hebron, and to those in all their places where he and his men had roamed. There's another lesson here too. First off, a cynic might read this and go, oh, he's just trying to buy some political goodwill because, he's about to be king and he's going to need the favor of some powerful people in order to get there. But what I see is this. David looked at the amazing gift that he was given and he went, a lot of people helped me get here. All these names should be recognizable. If you didn't catch them all right away, that's fine because it's not exactly English names that we easily connect in our brains. But these, as it says at the very end, were all places where his men had roamed and had fled. And these were places where people helped and took care of him. And David said, you know what? I want to pay them back for the kindness that they showed me then. I want to give to them more than what they gave to me because of their generosity, their goodness. This was a hard passage for me to go through when I first studied this. I will not forget. And even as I was preparing and going through it again this week to get ready to share, this was a hard one for me because, I don't know, maybe because I was raised middle class in North America. And I was told if you want to get it, you got to go out and earn it and work hard and get it. That's how you do it. And this isn't saying not to do that, by the way. It's not like the men that stayed behind did nothing. They did something. And in fact, David in the Bible actually rebukes those who are lazy. Right? It's not about them. It's not about the lazy people. This is just about recognizing who is the giver, who is the provider, who is the one, who is the source of all goodness, who is the source of our wealth, who is the source of our happiness. And when you see that it was Jesus all along, when you see it was God, when you see the Holy Spirit interacting in your life and blessing you, then you can recognize for yourself, wait a minute. This isn't mine to begin with. It's one of those things that people have said, well, how much should I tithe? Right? And the answer often has been, well, and generally as a rule of thumb, most people try to give 10%. But the rule I always say to people is, look, you know what you should tithe? You should tithe what you can, because it all belongs to Christ anyway. Whether you're giving here at the church or whether you're using those blessed resources that God has gifted you to do something outside of the church or with your home or whatever it is, whatever you do, make sure you spend all of your resources, all of the gifts that God has given you in order to expand the kingdom and show kindness and love and mercy, show all the attributes of God, all the fruit of the Spirit to everyone around you. The Lord has been good to me. Let me share in the goodness of the Lord with others. Let us not fool ourselves into thinking it was our own foolish hands that did all these wonderful, magnificent things. But let us recognize the goodness and the providence of God that truly allowed these things to happen. Because guess what? Those wonderful things done by your hands don't happen if God didn't bless you with the gifts, if God didn't bless you with the knowledge, if God didn't bless you with the strength, if God didn't gift you the opportunity. It's all from God. And that's why we give him praise, and we honor him, and we glorify him.